A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 34. Acted on reflex. Terrified by Lucian's sudden movement to the point that she didn't dare move, Roxanne reacted like a petrified cat when the man drew close to her. She desperately tried to break free, but he effortlessly seized her hands and locked them behind her back. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. "Wake up, Lucian!" Her eyes brimmed with panic as the distance between their lips diminished. Even her voice had grown a touch tense. Unfortunately, Lucian remained unmoved and continued leaning closer to her. Only when the distance between them was so negligible that they could sense each other's breathing and Roxanne was so nervous that her heart almost stopped pounding did she sense the man finally drawing to a stop. Heaving a sigh of relief, she cautiously turned her face and studied his expression to ascertain whether he had awakened. The moment she did so, she met the man's clear gaze. "Sorry. I was still half awake earlier." Masking the mirth in his eyes, Lucian put on an apologetic expression. As he said that, he released his grip on her hands and allowed her to leave his embrace. In all honesty, he wanted to continue teasing her. But after seeing her reaction, he felt that he should quit while he was ahead. Before Roxanne could even lambaste him, he had already apologized. For a moment, her expression froze. She couldn't quite decide between throwing a fit and forgiving him. She was stunned for some time before she realized that she should leave the man's arms before all else. With that thought in mind, she bit her lip and lowered her eyes as she got ready to stand up. Unexpectedly, she had been too apprehensive earlier and didn't dare budge an inch. Adding to the fact that she had been restrained for too long, her legs had already gone numb by the time she tried to get up. Before she could regain her feet, she swayed and toppled forward, falling right into Lucian's arms. Never having expected such a delightful surprise, Lucian calmly opened his arms and allowed her to fall straight into his embrace. "How dare you!" Roxanne panically struggled to pull away and glared at the man who appeared all nonchalant before her. She wanted to reprimand him, but she didn't know where to start. After all, she was the one who accidentally fell earlier. Furthermore, she basically deserved it when he restrained her in his arms because she took the initiative to approach him first. She could already imagine the arguments the man would use to riposte her before she had even started with her accusations. Thinking about his possible reaction, she lowered her eyes and zipped her mouth in frustration. Getting to her feet while clutching at the back of the couch carefully, she remained standing there for a few seconds to get herself steady. At the same time, her brain whirred at warp speed, hoping to forget the whole blunder just now. "I hadn't been sleeping too well in the past 2 days. I'd finally managed to fall into a deep sleep earlier, so I likely acted on reflex when you touched me without warning." "I'm sorry," Lucian uttered airily. Following his explanation, Roxanne appeared to have even lesser reason to blow up at him. In a nutshell, Lucian was trying to brush off his faux pas earlier by claiming that she had disrupted his sleep. They both stared at each other for a long time before Lucian decided to spare the woman before him, thanks to his good mood. Arching a brow, he inquired, "So, why did you suddenly approach me, Ms. Jarvis?" Since Roxanne was still feeling irate inwardly, her tone wasn't all that pleasant. "Essie asked me to help treat your insomnia." But seeing that you were sleeping so soundly earlier, I don't think that's necessary anymore." After saying that, she made to whirl around and leave, not in the mood to see his face anymore. She spun on her heel and walked a distance away, but the man behind her remained unusually silent. Finding it a tad strange, she glanced back over her shoulder in puzzlement, only to meet the man's dark gaze. As their eyes locked, her heart lurched. She turned back and went to the backyard without a backward glance. "Did you pick on her, mommy?" Concerned about the interaction between the two adults in the house, the children hadn't been in the mood to play. The instant they caught sight of Roxanne coming out, they immediately swarmed over to her. Roxanne smilingly patted them on the head, but her expression was somewhat distracted. Clocking the look on the woman's face, Estella tilted her head in puzzlement. She cast her gaze behind Roxanne, but she didn't see any signs of Lucian. "Did Daddy pick on you, Ms. Jarvis?" she queried cautiously. The mention of the man in the house made Roxanne unconsciously frown. Feigning a nonchalant expression, she shook her head with a smile. "Nope." Estella stared at her with suspicion written clear in her eyes. "Where is he, then?" Roxanne turned and glanced in the direction of the living room before replying, "He has just awakened. Perhaps, he's still sitting on the couch." Having said that, she hastily withdrew her gaze and wanted to change the subject. Alas, Estella didn't give her that chance. She persistently questioned, "Can you treat his insomnia, Ms. Jarvis?" Roxanne choked. Because of Lucian's sudden awakening and what he did after that, she hadn't the time to take his pulse. She didn't even know why he was suffering from insomnia, let alone treat him. Therefore, that question truly had her caught between a rock and a difficult place. Seemingly aware that she wouldn't be able to answer that, Estella looked at her for a long while before declaring firmly, "He picked on you, Ms. Jarvis. Otherwise, she wouldn't be unable to answer my question at all. At the very least, she would have been able to either say yes or no." Her expression now makes it apparent that she didn't even have the chance to diagnose his problem. They must have had a row again. At that thought, she pouted in chagrin. "Daddy is such a jerk." Upon hearing that, Roxanne's wrath and embarrassment finally dissipated. She found the situation rather hilarious. For some inexplicable reason, she's biased toward me, so much so that she's certain Lucian picked on me without asking any questions about whatever happened. "Don't be angry, Ms. Jarvis. I'll avenge you." Estella gingerly tugged at the hem of Roxanne's shirt. Seeing her solemn expression, the smile on Roxanne's face turned genuine. "I'm not angry, and your daddy didn't pick on me either. Calm down, Essie." While saying that, she stroked Estella's head soothingly. Still, the little girl scrutinized her for a long moment. To convince her, Roxanne bit the bullet and added, "I'll check him out later regarding his insomnia. It shouldn't be a big problem." Estella believed her half dubiously upon hearing her remark. Roxanne chatted with the children for some time. When she noticed it was getting late, she brought them back into the mansion. Unsurprisingly, Lucian was still sitting on the couch, but this time, he was dealing with work matters while wearing a frown. When he heard them coming in, he lifted his eyes and cast his gaze over. "Daddy." For once, Estella voluntarily let go of Roxanne's hand and went over to her father. Lucian regarded his daughter in mystification, wondering what she was up to. Estella climbed onto the couch unhurriedly and leaned close to her father's ear. In a whisper, she demanded, "Did you pick on Ms. Jarvis earlier?" After asking that, she pulled away from him. Sticking her hands on her hips, she shot daggers at her father as though interrogating a suspect. Not as terrified as before. Roxanne had no idea what Estella whispered next to Lucian's ear. All she knew was that the man looked at her meaningfully after Estella had spoken to him before denying in a low voice. No sooner had he said that than they both swung their gazes at her. Lucian wore a bizarrely innocent expression, while suspicion was written all over Estella's face. The question Estella asked her when they were in the backyard earlier flashed across Roxanne's mind. Complemented by their expressions, she felt that she could surmise the situation to a T. At the thought of Estella's determination to avenge her, Roxanne was both amused and exasperated. After a few seconds of silence, she stepped forward and started, "Essie is exceedingly worried about you, so I'd best take a look at you. Besides, it's a problem if you keep having insomnia." In other words, she was trying to tell him that she only decided to treat him for Estella's sake. When Lucian heard that, he quirked an eyebrow and glanced at his daughter beside him. Estella nodded emphatically with triumph etched across her features. Clocking that, Lucian chuckled lightly and held his wrist out to Roxanne. Roxanne lifted her hand and grasped his wrist. While diagnosing his condition, however, she couldn't quite ignore the warmth emanating from his wrist. It should have only taken a minute or two at most, but it took quite a while because she kept getting distracted. "Never mind if you really can't determine the cause. Perhaps I've been too busy with work these days. I'll be fine after resting for a few days." Lucian drawled insouciantly upon seeing that she couldn't diagnose his condition after some time had passed. Roxanne happened to find the cause at that instant. Dropping her fingers from his wrist, she stated placidly, "Your liver is a bit inflamed, probably because of overwork. Take some medicine to reduce the inflammation. Alternatively, it'll also heal by itself after you rest for a few days." Lucian inclined his head in acknowledgement. "It's getting late. You should bring Essie home earlier, Mr. Farwell." Roxanne began asking him to leave after glancing at the time. Lucian didn't voice any objections either. He got up from the couch nonchalantly and looked down at Estella, who was still sitting on the couch with a reluctant expression on her face. Although Estella had played with Archie, Benny, and Roxanne for the whole afternoon, she was still disinclined to leave. She gazed at Roxanne pitifully, hoping that the latter would allow her to stay. "Be good, Essie. I've got work recently, so I can't let you sleep over here. If you want to come over in the future, you can do so anytime." Roxanne patted her head apologetically. At the side, Archie and Benny nodded as they seconded, "Bring Essie here often to play, Mr. Farwell." A strange feeling flittered deep within Roxanne's heart when she heard the two boys saying that out of the blue. It seems that their attitudes toward Lucian had changed entirely after the hot spring vacation. "I still remember that they were even more averse to him than I was in the past. If this were to continue, I wouldn't be surprised if they were to learn about their identities one day." The moment Roxanne realized the direction of her thoughts, her brows knitted together imperceptibly. For some inexplicable reason, I'm not as terrified as before at the thought of them learning about their identities. Is it because of the changes in the man before me? As that thought occurred to her, she instinctively lifted her eyes and stole a peek at the man standing in front of her. Lucian nodded at her apathetically before gazing down at Archie and Benny. In a gentle voice, he murmured, "Thank you. I'll be sure to do that." While they conversed, they wholly ignored Roxanne, the true owner of the house. She was deluged with exasperation, but she couldn't be bothered to gainsay them anyway. Surprised she is willing to apologize. Despite her reluctance, Estella knew that they would definitely be frequent visitors henceforth since her father was pursuing Roxanne. Thus, she obediently slid off the couch and sweetly bid Roxanne farewell before leaving with Lucian. Only when Lucian's car had driven into the distance did Roxanne turn back around and return to the mansion with Archie and Benny. The two boys spent the whole day playing and worrying about the adults' matters, so they started yawning incessantly now that things had settled down. It was already pretty late, so Roxanne had them go in and rest while she went to the study. As the top prestigious family in the medical field in the country, the Damaris family attracted much attention despite having gone into seclusion for many years. Consequently, the research institute established this time promptly came to light as soon as it was completed. When it came to the collaboration this time, the Damaris family didn't plan on keeping a low profile. Instead, they would be publicizing the list of their collaborators in the next few days. By then, that list would not only represent the collaborators of the Damaris family, but it would also signify the Damaris family pointing out the top doctors in the country to the ordinary people in Chania. As one of the members on that list, Roxanne had to work all the harder to improve her medical skills so that she wouldn't disappoint anyone. While she was poring over medical books, her phone at the side rang all of a sudden. She glanced at it, only to see that it was a call from Jack. Hence, she answered the call without hesitation. "Is something the matter that you're calling at this hour, Mr. Damaris?" Jack massaged his brows, sounding a touch solemn. "Do you still remember the daughter of the Hightower family back then, Ms. Jarvis? I mean, the woman who railed at you while in a drunken state." Upon hearing that, Roxanne combed through her memories before she finally recalled the person in question. Almost all her focus had been occupied by Lucian and the project recently, so she would have long since cast that woman to the back of her mind if Jack didn't mention her. "Yes, I remember her." "Why?" she queried in puzzlement. "It was because of this matter that my grandfather suddenly called me home this afternoon. He asked me to help contact you, claiming that Jessica Hightower would like to apologize to you in person. What do you think?" "If you don't want to go, I can turn it down for you," Jack uttered. Roxanne wavered for a long moment. "According to what he said earlier, this is old Mr. Damaris' wish. While I think there's no need for us to meet, I naturally have to show the old man some respect." On the other end of the phone, Jack seemingly discerned her thoughts. In a deep voice, he added, "You don't need to worry about my grandfather. He won't doubt your capabilities because of such an irrelevant matter." Roxanne smiled gratefully at his reassurance. Then, she answered calmly, "It's okay. If Ms. Hightower is sincere about apologizing, I don't mind meeting her. Who knows, we can be friends." Never having expected her to agree so readily, Jack was stunned for a few seconds. Subsequently, he warned with a frown, "Forget about making friends with her. I'm already surprised she's willing to apologize, considering her temperament. I'm afraid the meeting this time won't be that pleasant." Roxanne had only interacted with Jessica once, so she didn't understand her all that well. Her heart grew heavy when she heard Jack's remark, but still, she found it necessary to do Hector that favor. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Damaris. I'll be careful when meeting her." The Damaris family would be publicizing the list soon, so she didn't want to start any unnecessary trouble. Jack grunted in acknowledgement. The two of them then bid each other good night before hanging up. After hanging up the phone, Jack texted Stephen directly, saying that Roxanne had agreed to a meeting. Without waiting for a reply, he turned off his phone and went to sleep. As soon as Stephen woke up the next morning, he saw the message from Jack. Seeing the affirmative response from Roxanne, the heavy boulder that had been weighing on him in the past few days finally eased. "If I'm correct, Lucian is only attacking Hightower Group because my daughter offended Roxanne. As long as she can obtain her forgiveness, the Hightower family will likely be able to get out of the crisis this time." Great relief suffused him at that thought. During breakfast, he initially wanted to lecture his pampered daughter as usual when she was late. But upon remembering that he still had something to ask of her, he swallowed the words on the tip of his tongue. "I've already had Jack set up an appointment with the lady you offended a few days ago. Find a time to apologize to her in person," Stephen instructed tersely. Hearing that, Jessica abruptly stilled and lifted her eyes to look at her father in utter disbelief. She didn't think that she had done anything wrong. The Hightower and Damaris families were pretty close. For that reason, she had made the acquaintance of a number of young and talented individuals who enjoyed some prestige in the medical field. However, she had never heard of Roxanne. Despite Lucian backing Roxanne up that night, Jessica still questioned Roxanne's medical skills and her capability of securing a collaboration with the Damaris family. She initially thought that her father would understand her. But never had she expected him to ground her after she was sent home that night. "In the past few days, I hadn't even stepped foot out of the house. Now, he has brought this matter up again, but he actually wants me to apologize to her. What gives?" She expressed herself candidly. "No way. I didn't do anything wrong, so why should I apologize to her?" When Stephen heard that, he was so livid that he slammed his fork down. Without allowing any room for negotiation, he ordered, "Regardless of whether you did anything wrong, you must apologize to her. If you don't do so, you'll no longer be my daughter from now on out." As he finished his sentence, he shot a glare at his daughter. Then, he got to his feet and went back upstairs. Jessica watched her father leave, her eyes brimming with grievance and shock. "This is the first time he ever blew up at me, and because of that woman named Roxanne to boot. What exactly is so great about her that everyone is siding with her?" When she recalled Roxanne's interaction with Jack that night, her temper spiked. Coupled with the fact that she was just lectured by her father, she lost all her appetite. With a dark expression on her face, she slammed her fork onto the table. "Miss Hightower," the housekeeper murmured worriedly upon noticing that she hadn't eaten at all. No sooner had she spoken than the person in front of her snapped her head back viciously. Jabbing a finger in her face, Jessica lambasted, "Even you want to control me now? Who do you think you are? Shut up!" The housekeeper's face flushed bright red at the severe censure. She went wholly silent. Only when Jessica had finished lashing out and whirled around to stalk up the stairs did she dare to straighten up. She then cleared the dining table without daring to utter a single word. Jessica returned to her bedroom, looking all grim. As she recalled her father's words earlier, resentment glinted in her eyes. "He wants me to apologize to that? Ha, that's impossible. But since he already made himself clear, I'm afraid I'd have to meet her anyway." The mere thought of having to meet Roxanne again caused a wave of disgust to wash over her. List of partners. Roxanne assumed that the list of partners would only be announced by the Damaris family in a few days. Little did she expect to receive Larry's call the next morning, right after she woke up. Hence, she answered the phone groggily. "Have you seen it? The Damaris family has released the list of partners." Larry's voice rang out the moment the call connected. His words jolted Roxanne awake. "Why so sudden?" "I'm not ready yet." Larry chuckled. "I'm as clueless as you are. However, I heard that there'll be a commencement event in 2 days in the form of a press conference. Therefore, we had better be prepared, as reporters nowadays can be very demanding. Who knows what sort of questions will be thrown out by them, especially toward someone new like you who doesn't have any background." The grateful Roxanne replied, "Thanks for giving me the heads up, Larry. I'll make the necessary preparations." Nonetheless, Larry quickly followed up. "Anyway, congratulations, Dr. Jarvis. Your reputation in this country has finally gained some traction." Roxanne pursed her lips into a smile. "I hope that I won't let everyone down." "I'm sure you won't," Larry reassured her. As the purpose of Larry's call was to compliment her, both of them exchanged further pleasantries before ending it. Subsequently, Roxanne, still having trouble accepting the fact, sat on her bed with her legs crossed while checking the morning news. Just as expected, she saw the news relating to the Damaris family's project where the list of partners was also attached. On that list, her name was right below Larry's, followed by Daniel and other famous doctors within the country. In spite of that, Roxanne staring at the list was still a bundle of nerves, for she had joined as someone new. Therefore, in the eyes of the public, she was someone without a track record in the medical field. Even though she was used to being seen through colored lenses, the skepticism toward her this time would probably be amplified by 1,000 times. All of a sudden, Roxanne didn't know how she was supposed to face the situation. It was when she felt unsettled that her phone rang again. Getting a grip on herself, Roxanne glanced down at her phone and saw Harvey's name on the caller ID. "I heard that you have been appointed as one of the partners of the Damaris family." Harvey, who was overseas all this while, seldom followed the local news. If he hadn't seen the list announced today, he would be oblivious to what was going on. Having not heard from her professor in a very long time, Roxanne's face lit up in joy. "You heard it already? I had only wanted to tell you once everything is set." Harvey smiled as he sidestepped her reply. "Well done. Anyway, I've gone through the list and saw many local pioneers there. Compared to them, you and Larry are relatively more inexperienced." His comment struck a chord with Roxanne's insecurities, triggering a dejected expression to descend upon her face. Given how well Harvey knew his student, he could imagine her reaction without even looking. Thus, he with a smile consoled her, having said that, "You don't have to feel anxious about the matter, as I have confidence in your capabilities. Besides, you're a student of the great Harvey Lambert. If anyone dares to doubt you, you can get them to see me." Harvey's words succeeded in reassuring Roxanne. "I understand. Thank you, Professor Lambert. I won't disappoint you." His and her. Meanwhile, the news naturally didn't escape Jessica's attention. At the sight of Roxanne's name on the list, a gloomy expression appeared on her face. That woman is not only working with Jack but also has her name listed so close to the top. Jessica couldn't help but recall the distance between Roxanne and Jack's seats the other night. What has she done to deserve it? After staring at Roxanne's name for a long time, an insidious look flashed across her eyes. "I'll reveal her true colors for everyone to see since she is nothing more than a pretty face. I have no idea what she has done to Jack for him to think so highly of her, and I can't believe how big-headed she has become. When I finally expose her, she'll no longer be able to show her face in the local medical industry anymore. When that happens, Jack will never be able to be together with her regardless of how much he likes that pretty face of hers." Just imagining how Roxanne was ridiculed by the public was enough to spark a sense of elation within Jessica. Now that she had figured out her plan, the grim-looking Jessica made a few calls. In the afternoon, Stephen's expression drastically darkened at the sight of Jessica's empty seat. After all, he had gone all out to obtain an opportunity to seek Lucian's forgiveness. Little did he expect that after all that he had done, his plans were foiled by his own daughter. Regardless of how much effort he put in, it would be all for naught if Jessica refused to apologize. At that moment, given how late his daughter was to lunch, it was clear that she had no intention of showing any remorse. Just as Stephen's frustration began to set in, the sound of footsteps could be heard from upstairs, followed by Jessica emerging from the corner of the stairs. The sight of her elicited a sigh of relief from Stephen. Subsequently, his tone was very much eased when he spoke. "Have you given the matter I told you some thought?" His words caused Jessica's expression to darken momentarily before recovering its usual calm. Smiling obediently, she replied, "Since that's what you want, I have no choice even if it's against my wishes. So, instead of delaying it any further, can you help me ask Ms. Jarvis if she's free tonight?" The relieved Stephen answered, "All right. I'll check with her." From his perspective, apologizing to Roxanne and obtaining her forgiveness as soon as possible was the best possible outcome. Only then would Lucian let Hightower Group go. After lunch, Stephen sent Jack a message to check if he and Roxanne were available that night in front of his daughter. When Jack received the message, a sense of dread crept into him. However, since it was Jessica, he didn't give it much thought. In the worst-case scenario of her trying to repeat her tantrum, he would be there to keep the situation under control. Holding that thought, Jack relayed the message to Roxanne, who swiftly agreed to the meeting. Once he received her confirmation, Jack replied to Stephen immediately and fixed the time and place. After being told of the appointment, an icy glint flashed across Jessica's eyes. "Remember to mind your attitude in the evening." Worried that his daughter would behave rashly again, the concerned Stephen reminded, Ms. Jarvis has powerful patrons. Hence, she's not someone we can afford to offend. Unfortunately, her father's words had only served to intensify Jessica's contempt for Roxanne and fan the flames of her desire to ruin the latter's reputation. When evening arrived, Jessica headed out early. Thinking that she was really going to apologize to Roxanne, the naive Stephen watched her get into the car and left. Meanwhile, Roxanne had delegated Madeline to pick the children up to Madeline as she promptly headed to the meeting. No sooner had she stepped out the door than she saw Jack's car at the entrance. At the sight of her, he alighted from the car and took a look behind her. Feeling slightly disappointed, he inquired, "Are the children still at school?" Roxanne nodded. "I got a friend of mine to pick them up." "Is there a reason why you want to see them, Mr. Damaris?" Jack casually nodded. "I've brought them some gifts. But since they're not around, let's just forget it. I'll personally hand them over the next time I see the boys." The fact that he had prepared presents for them surprised Roxanne, for she didn't expect him to be so attentive. "Since you have gotten them the presents, it's only right you hand them to the boys yourself." Roxanne pursed her lips into a smile upon regaining her senses. With that, she turned around and headed toward her car. She had barely taken a step when Jack's voice rang out from behind her. "I think you shouldn't drive, as it'll be hard to avoid drinking tonight. If you drive here, you'll just end up having to collect your car tomorrow." His words caused Roxanne to stop as a conflicted expression emerged on her face. She still remembered the tantrum Jessica had thrown when she got drunk because Jack was too close to her. Therefore, if Jessica were to see her arrive in Jack's car, the former would change her mind at the last minute even if her desire to apologize was sincere. Cognizant of her concerns, Jack reassured her, "What happened the last time was my fault. That said, since there's nothing going on between the two of us, you shouldn't overthink the matter. If she repeats her accusations from the other day, I'll clear the air." Sensing from his tone that he felt responsible, Roxanne knitted her brows. "It's not your fault, Mr. Damaris. There's no need to blame yourself." No sooner had she spoken than she glanced at her watch and realized it was time to go. If they were to delay any further, they would likely be late for the appointment. Cognizant of the situation, Roxanne stopped hesitating and walked up to Jack's side. After declining his suggestion for her to sit in the front passenger seat, she opened the back seat door and got in. Despite the frown on his face, Jack reminded himself of her concerns and didn't persist and returned to the car. Soon, the car gradually started driving from Roxanne's home. By the way, why was the list of partners announced so suddenly? Long the journey to the restaurant, Roxanne couldn't help but ask. With his hand on the wheel, Jack replied in a deep voice, "Well, it wasn't. The Damaris family has been making preparations for a long time and has gotten in touch with the media. Also, since the aim of our project is to provide a public service, they naturally deserve to know. Therefore, announcing the name list is our way of being transparent to them, on top of showing everyone how important the project is to the Damaris family." Roxanne couldn't help but feel amazed by the explanation. When Larry mentioned earlier that commencement events were to be held soon, she didn't take him seriously. It turned out that the Damaris family had indeed liaised with the media. Nevertheless, the turn of events didn't come as such a surprise after hearing Jack's reasoning. Actually, I had wanted to inform you yesterday but was called away by Grandpa. Showing concern, Jack inquired, do you feel pressured due to the sudden announcement? As a fellow doctor, Roxanne, finding no reason to hide her thoughts from him, responded with a nod. A little, but the pressure will serve as my future motivation. Although he was initially surprised by Roxanne's words, Jack quickly found it reasonable after giving it some thought. After all, from the first day he met her, he knew that she wasn't someone to shy away from a challenge. With that thought in mind, he gave the lady sitting in the back seat a look of admiration through the rearview mirror. When he saw the resolve written all over Roxanne's face, Jack couldn't help but feel moved by it. Finally, they made their way through the heavy traffic and managed to arrive at the restaurant right on the dot. They expected Jessica to have arrived, however, the latter was nowhere to be seen. As the empty table caused both of them to exchange glances, a sense of dread descended upon the two of them concurrently. I'll call and check, Jack suggested with a cocked brow once they took their seats. Nodding in acknowledgement, Roxanne could feel an inexplicable sense of trepidation creeping into her. Jack, have you arrived? Jessica's voice rang out the moment the call connected. With the phone on speaker, Jack grunted in response before asking, where are you? At that moment, Jessica, sitting languidly in the cafe next door, replied with an apologetic tone, I'm really sorry. Please wait a few more minutes for me, as I'm currently stuck in traffic. I thought I was going to be early when I left home, but her explanation caused Jack and Roxanne to glance at each other. Although they were skeptical about it, they couldn't find any fault with the excuse since it is indeed peak hour. Even though Roxanne's house was close, traffic did hold them back for almost half an hour. As a result, Jessica would naturally take longer since Hightower residence was even further away. Having considered it, Jack replied grimly, all right then. There's no need to rush. Just drive safe. Despite the contempt that flashed across Jessica's eyes, she didn't let it affect her cordial tone. As I'll probably be stuck here for a while, there's no need to wait for me. I'll get the restaurant staff to serve you first. Just when Jack wanted to decline, the waiter arrived with the food. Having no other choice but to accept it implicitly, he responded, we'll be waiting for you. With a hum of acknowledgement, Jessica ended the call before going on to make another. Oblivious to what she was up to, Jack and Roxanne assumed that she was really held up by traffic. All they did was stare at the food in front of them with neither showing any intention to dig in. Firstly, Jessica had not shown up. Secondly, both of them felt that something was amiss. In spite of that, when Roxanne scanned the surroundings and didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, she had no choice but to suppress the suspicion that arose within her. Subsequently, both of them discussed the partnership while waiting for Jessica to show up. However, unknown to them, a camera flash repeatedly lit up from amongst the trees outside the window. Back at the cafe Jessica was in, she had just finished a cup of coffee when the screen on her phone started blinking. After throwing it a glance, she picked it up to answer. I've gotten the pictures, said a voice succinctly. His words elicited a cocked brow from Jessica as she replied in glee, in that case, I'll be waiting for your shocking expose tomorrow. Me too, the man responded in a solemn tone. With that, Jessica ended the call. Subsequently, she got to her feet and regained her composure before heading to the restaurant next door. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting." Upon entering the restaurant, Jessica gave her two guests an apologetic look. Her arrival brought a sense of relief to Roxanne and Jack, who responded with a faint smile. "It's all right. Please take a seat." Nodding in acknowledgement, Jessica sat down beside them. However, at the sight of the untouched food on the table, she looked at them in surprise. "Didn't I ask you to start first? Why did you wait for me? I'm really sorry that the food is now cold." Since Roxanne didn't know Jessica that well, she simply broke into a cordial smile. As for Jack, he gave her a perfunctory reply. "Since you're the host, it's right that we wait for you." He had barely spoken when silence descended upon the table. At a loss as to what to do, Roxanne gave Jack an awkward look, for she intended to leave early if possible. When Jessica wasn't around, she and Jack could still talk about the partnership. Now that the former had arrived, they would have to stop. Thus, Roxanne had no desire to continue wasting time there. When Jack's eyes met hers, he easily guessed what was on her mind. Taking the initiative to break the silence, he said, "Jessica, didn't you mention that this meal?" Jolted back to her senses, Jessica threw Roxanne a knowing glance. "Ah, I'm sorry. I was befuddled after getting stuck in the traffic for so long. The fact that I'm supposed to apologize to Ms. Jarvis over dinner almost slipped my mind." Jessica then got to her feet and raised her glass at Roxanne. "I had too much to drink the other night, Ms. Jarvis. Therefore, I hope that you'll excuse my behavior. His toast is a symbol of my apology." No sooner had she spoken than she downed her glass of wine in a single gulp. After that, she showed her empty glass to them and even paused in front of Roxanne to hint at her. Her gesture elicited a conflicted look in Roxanne's eyes, as it was evident that Jessica was pressuring her into reciprocating with a drink. However, she would only drink when it was absolutely necessary. On top of that, Jessica was supposed to apologize instead of putting her in another difficult position. "Ms. Jarvis, are you unwilling to forgive me?" With a slight knit of her brows, Jessica was filled with remorse. "I understand why you wouldn't want to do so, considering how outrageous my behavior was. For throwing a tantrum at you in front of so many, I was even grounded by my father the moment I got home. Subsequently, I used the last few days to reflect upon my actions." Pausing briefly, Jessica pursed her lips in a self-deprecating manner and turned to look at Jack. "I don't deny having feelings for Jack, but who he fancies is none of my business. Also, I shouldn't have forced my feelings upon him and put both of you in a difficult spot. It doesn't matter whether both of you forgive me or not. I just want to let you know that I'm truly sorry for my actions." Jessica's brimming sincerity ignited a glint in Roxanne's eyes. In truth, she wasn't bothered at all by what happened that day. Now that Jessica had apologized, it was only appropriate for her to provide a response. Holding that thought, Roxanne raised her glass in the end. "Ms. Hightower, it's not as serious as you make it out to be. To be honest, I didn't take offense over what happened that day. Therefore, you shouldn't too." The moment she finished, Roxanne flashed a flat smile before downing a glass of wine. No sooner had she done so that her brows instantly furrowed. Noticing the grim look on her face, Jack frowned and inquired. However, Roxanne just waved at him before throwing Jessica a glance. Did Jessica do this on purpose? Why did she choose such a strong wine for dinner? Nevertheless, when Roxanne didn't notice anything amiss after drinking it, she wondered if she had been overthinking what was going on. After downing 2 glasses of wine, the 3 of them fell into another awkward silence. After all, the reason they were gathered was just to hear Jessica's apology. Cognizant of the tension, Jessica exchanged pleasantries briefly before getting up to take her leave. Once she was gone, Jack turned toward Roxanne. Are you hungry? Do you want to eat someplace else? Both of them barely ate and the food was already cold. Nonetheless, Roxanne, feeling a little woozy, wondered what sort of wine had Jessica ordered. Although she only had a small glass, the after effects were extremely strong. In response to Jack's question, she shook her head with a frown. It's fine. I should head back earlier anyway, as the children should be home by now. I can't let them wait up for me. Naturally, Jack didn't insist and got up to leave with her. When they went down the stairs upon leaving the restaurant, Roxanne accidentally slipped and almost fell down. Fortunately, Jack noticed it and turned around to catch her in the nick of time. Thank you, Roxanne murmured before retracting her hand. Jack flashed a smile. No problem. After they got into the car one after the other, Jack, who didn't drink, decided to drive Roxanne home to not trouble the driver. On the way home, a black sedan followed them from a safe distance. With his attention entirely focused on Roxanne, Jack didn't notice the car at all. As the traffic jam had cleared, it took them less than 10 minutes to reach Roxanne's home. It's getting late, so forgive me for not inviting you in, Roxanne explained in a cursory tone. Jack gave her a casual nod. You should hurry back in. As for Archie and Benny's presents, I'll hand them over the next time I see them. After acknowledging him with a smile, Roxanne alighted and headed home. It wasn't until he saw her go back in that Jack drove leisurely back to the Damaris residence. Mommy! The moment Roxanne stepped through the door, the 2 boys beamed and rushed up to her side. She tousled their hair with a smile before changing out of her shoes. Meanwhile, they gave her a puzzled look. Why didn't you pick us up tonight? After the interaction from the day before, the boys and Estella assumed that Roxanne would pick them up as usual. Thus, the sight of Madeline surprised them. While Estella was visibly disappointed, the boys were worried that their mother had a new tiff with their father. Consequently, Roxanne was baffled to see the children's anxious looks. I had a last-minute appointment tonight. What's wrong? Upon exchanging glances, the boys observed Roxanne for a while. Only after they determined she wasn't lying did relief descend upon them. Smiling gleefully, they replied, Nothing. We're just curious. That's all. Roxanne grinned apologetically. I'm sorry I didn't inform you ahead of time. Going forward, I'll try my best to pick you up on time, all right? Hearing Roxanne's promise, there was a glint in the boys' eyes and they jumped in joy. I cannot forgive you. The next morning, while Roxanne was having breakfast with the children before sending them to school, the doorbell suddenly rang. The ring caused Roxanne and the boys to exchange glances as the same thought popped into their minds: Lucian and Estella were there. After all, both of them usually dropped by at that hour. Without a second thought, Roxanne got up and opened the door. She was subsequently greeted by the sight of her best friend looking all anxious. Did something happen? A sinking feeling crept into her heart. The frowning Madeline stretched her head to look at the children who were busy eating before pulling Roxanne out the door. Cognizant that it was something the children weren't supposed to know, Roxanne followed the former to the yard. "What's wrong? Did you see the news in the morning?" Madeline sounded exceptionally grim. Hearing that, Roxanne shook her head in response as she was clueless. As Lissa was held back by something at home and couldn't come to work for the week, she had woken up early in the morning to prepare breakfast and watch the children eat. Consequently, she didn't have time to read the morning news at all. Nevertheless, Roxanne could tell from Madeline's expression that something grave had happened. Knitting her brows, Madeline didn't even know how to break the news. What on earth happened? Madeline's reaction told Roxanne that it was something related to her. She repeated with a frown, "If you don't tell me, I'll go in and read it myself." Just when she turned around to go back in, Madeline grabbed her hand to stop her. "News of you going on a date late at night with Jack has splashed across the headlines. They accuse both of you of being close and suspect that strings were pulled for you to be included as one of the Damaris family's partners." Madeline, who greatly resented the news, spoke in a swift but incoherent manner. In spite of that, Roxanne's face darkened, as she had caught the gist of it. "My date with Jack." The only thing that came to mind was the dinner the night before. "However, there were 3 of us. How did it end up becoming a date?" In the midst of racking her brain, an image suddenly flashed across her mind. Last night, Jessica didn't show up for a long time even though both of us had arrived. "Whatever it is, you had better not send the boys to school. LOL, take them instead, as I'm worried that you would be swarmed by reporters there. Also, don't leave home as far as possible," Madeline instructed with a solemn expression on her face. Roxanne was well aware of the gravity of the situation. Even though she was certain of her innocence, the media wasn't going to let her off the hook easily. In addition, Roxanne didn't want her affairs to burden her children, causing them an unnecessary emotional burden. With that in mind, she nodded without hesitation before expressing her gratitude. "Thank God you came all the way here to tell me." "However," Madeline ranted, "why are they slandering such a good doctor like you? Once I find out who's responsible, I'll definitely give them a piece of my mind." While Roxanne was trying to calm Madeline down with a smile, Jessica's face emerged again in her mind, for she couldn't think of anyone else. However, Roxanne had no clue whether someone else was behind Jessica. Realizing it was getting late, both of them went back into the house. As for the boys, their faces drooped in disappointment upon learning that Madeline was taking them to school. Since telling them the truth wasn't an option, Roxanne apologized, "I'm sorry. There's just something I need to deal with urgently. Once I'm done, I'll definitely end you to school every day." Noticing the gloomy look on Roxanne's face, the brothers, in spite of their dejection, acknowledged her promise obediently. Suppressing the news. After watching Madeline leave with the children, Roxanne went upstairs into the study and checked the news on her phone. The moment she went on Twitter, she saw the top trending topics. Pretty doctor pulled strings to advance her career. Jack Damaris goes on a late-night date with a pretty doctor. Jack Damaris' love life exposed. One by one, the topics were either related to her relationship with Jack or casting doubt on her credentials as a partner in the Damaris family's project. Just looking at those topics gave Roxanne a headache. Upon randomly clicking on one of them, she saw that it had almost 1 million views. Jack Damaris dates one of the doctors of the Damaris family's new project. Their suspected relationship was exposed. Inserted underneath the title were a few blurry photographs. The first one showed Roxanne sitting opposite Jack in the restaurant. Both of them looked like they were chatting, while the table in front of them was filled with food. The second picture showed them at the staircase of the restaurant entrance. Jack turned around to hold Roxanne's hand and they looked intimate. Finally, the last picture was Jack dropping Roxanne off at her home. After going through them, a sense of gloominess hung over Roxanne. Even though our photos were taken throughout the night, Jack and I were completely oblivious to the fact. As for the comments below, they could only be described as colorful. Is she that Dr. Jarvis on the list? I knew there was something strange about her. How can someone so young be such a skilled doctor? B. Just as expected, she's on the list because of her looks. Having said that, Dr. Jarvis is really pretty. If I were in the same position, I would have included her on C. What a beautiful couple. The first comment that doubted her capabilities instantly disheartened Roxanne. Even though she was expecting it the moment the name list was released, she never imagined it would happen in such a manner. Due to the expose, the doubt cast upon her credentials was the most discussed matter. Finally, she received a call from Jack while she was still surfing Twitter. It took her a few seconds to regain her senses before answering it. I'm sorry. I just saw the news online. Jack was extremely apologetic over the phone. Don't worry. I'll take responsibility by removing all the fake news. Despite his reassurances, the frowning Roxanne still had her concerns. Nonetheless, she replied, "Thank you." After a momentary silence, Jack continued, "About what happened last night, I'll demand an explanation from the Hightower family. Given Jessica's strange behavior, she must definitely have something to do with this." Surprised by his point, Roxanne hesitated for a few seconds before stopping him. "Let's just let it slide since we don't have any evidence. What matters now is clarifying the rumors online." Even though Roxanne shared his suspicions, she knew Jessica would unlikely admit to it in the absence of any proof. Therefore, confronting her was a futile endeavor. Furthermore, now that the news had exploded, all Roxanne could get from the mastermind was an apology even if she found them. That was of no help to her current predicament. Over the line, Roxanne's dissuasion prompted Jack to realize his hastiness. Upon calming down and seeing her perspective, he replied in a deep voice, "You're right. I was too consumed by my emotions. Let me think of a way to suppress the controversy first." After Roxanne hummed in agreement, Jack ended the call quickly. Watching her phone screen fade to black, Roxanne took a deep breath. With Jack taking action, she too couldn't sit idly by and allow the matter to go out of hand. Is the Hightower family involved? Initially, Roxanne wanted to put out a statement. However, since her Twitter account was mostly used to surf for news, it essentially had no content. Therefore, whatever she had to say would likely not reach anyone. After further contemplation, she decided to give Colby a call and got him to use the Research Institute's account to put out her clarification. Although the account wasn't particularly popular, it was still a much better option than using hers. What happened? Colby had gone to the Research Institute early and only learned of the controversy when Roxanne gave him a call. When he saw the pictures of Roxanne and Jack interacting with each other, he felt a faint squeeze in his heart. Sighing in resignation, Roxanne clarified, "I can't really give you a good explanation, but what happened last night was a misunderstanding. Both of us were not alone at the dinner." Even though her assurances failed to cheer Colby up, he remained hopeful and persuaded himself to have faith in Roxanne. After all, if I don't trust her, one can't expect the netizens who are ridiculing her to do the same. Moreover, Roxanne has no reason to lie about the matter. Holding that thought, the relieved Colby answered in a grim voice, "I understand. I'll put the statement out." Roxanne grunted in acknowledgement before ending the call. Half an hour later, both Jack's and the Research Institute's statements were released at almost the same time and quickly became a trending topic. However, instead of convincing anyone, the response triggered was entirely hostile and filled with skepticism. In fact, on Jack's Twitter account, netizens even began to cast doubt on the Damaris family. B3232, why are the Damaris family's selection criteria for the partners so lenient? How can one be included in such an important project or even end up on the name list by pulling some strings? Do you take us for fools? LOVE212, is being pretty all that's needed to be selected? In that case, even I am qualified. Many similar comments populated the feed, to the extent Jack ended up arguing with the netizens in the comments section. After skimming through the comments, Roxanne sent Jack a message, "Don't worry about me. I'll deal with this myself." At the other end, the sullen-looking Jack was busy responding to the barrage of insults. Subsequently, he was baffled when he received Roxanne's sudden message. He responded, "I was the one who caused this, so how can I sit idly by and do nothing?" Smiling wryly, Roxanne replied, "Just let me be the lightning rod of their disparagement. At the rate you're going, the Damaris family will be dragged into the matter. When that happens, I'll be the one to blame." Upon reading her message, the frowning Jack furrowed went through the comments online. It was then that he realized his presence had shifted the netizens' focus from Roxanne to the Damaris family. If he were to continue on his path, the Damaris family's reputation built over a century would be ruined. Cognizant of what was at stake, Jack weighed his options before deciding to remain silent. In spite of that, he still couldn't just sit around and do nothing. "Jack, in that case, I'll investigate if the Hightower family was behind this." Roxanne responded with her agreement. Meanwhile, when the netizens realized Jack had left, they swarmed toward the Research Institute's Twitter account and demanded for Roxanne to give an explanation. Naturally, Colby couldn't tolerate the slander against Roxanne. Faced with their relentless skepticism about her medical skills, he posted a list of all the major projects that the Research Institute had completed under Roxanne's leadership. Unfortunately, most of the netizens were laymen who were not bothered about such details. In fact, Even those who could see through the situation had their voices drowned swiftly. Silence is acquiescence. Meanwhile, Jessica had switched on the morning news early that morning at the Hightower residence, waiting to see Roxanne embarrass herself. As she had anticipated, Roxanne was condemned all over the internet as soon as the news was reported. However, Jessica had not expected Jack to defend Roxanne, nor did she anticipate that the Damaris family would be dragged down too. Feeling somewhat guilty over the situation, she hurriedly arranged for people to cause trouble at Roxanne's research institute. As a result, when Roxanne checked the news once more at noon that day, she saw the footage of a large crowd of reporters and people demanding explanations blocking the entrance of her research institute. She tensed up when she saw the scene on the screen, and without any hesitation, she immediately got up and rushed to the research institute. Their target is me. I can't allow this matter to affect the institute's employees. Half an hour later, Roxanne appeared at the entrance of the research institute. The minute the reporters and the crowd present noticed her, they turned around and rushed toward her. You must be Ms. Jarvis, right? Do you have anything to say about the criticism on the internet? What exactly is your relationship with Mr. Damaris? Are the rumors on the internet true that you joined the project through connections? Roxanne stepped out of the car to find herself surrounded by people, and all she could see were black microphones. Some people even shoved their microphones to her face and kept leaning toward her. Despite having prepared herself mentally, Roxanne was still a little overwhelmed by the situation and could only lean her back against the car door to stabilize herself. Just as she was about to speak, a reporter immediately interrupted her. Other than you, we've heard a lot about every doctor on the list. How would you evaluate your medical skills? Since Roxanne was more or less accustomed to the doubt over her medical abilities, she immediately responded, the Twitter account of our research institute has posted all the medical projects I've participated in during this period. You can check out the account if you have any questions about my medical skills. She intended to add something after that but was interrupted once more. Even so, your accomplishments are still much inferior to those of the other doctors on the list. Do you acknowledge that? The question brought a frown to Roxanne's face. Many of those on the list were more experienced than her in the medical field, so she naturally could not deny the reporter's words. Nonetheless, if she acknowledged it, not only would it mean that she had tacitly admitted that her qualifications were far from enough to work with the Damaris family, but it would also prove that the web rumors were true. Realizing that it was a trap, Roxanne was unsure of how to respond at that moment. However, the crowd took her silence as a sign of acquiescence, creating an uproar among them once more. One after another, questions flooded Roxanne's ears. Just as she was feeling helpless, there was a sudden commotion outside of the crowd. The crowd seemed to be attracted to something as they fell silent and looked in the direction of the commotion. Roxanne had no idea what was happening outside the crowd from where she was standing in the heart of it. She only knew that their attention had shifted away from her, giving her a moment of reprieve to think of a way to deal with it. Mr. Farwell? Just as she was trying to come up with a solution, she suddenly heard an exclamation of surprise. Roxanne froze when she heard that, and she could not help but question if her ears were playing tricks on her. How could a man as busy as Lucian show up here at this time of day? What makes you say that? As the hubbub got closer, Lucian soon entered Roxanne's field of vision, spotting a stern expression. Roxanne stared at the man before her in astonishment. "Why are you here?" His formal outfit suggested that he was just in a meeting, yet his tie appeared loose as though it had been tugged slightly. Upon hearing her query, Lucian's expression turned icy. "If you can come, why can't I?" After saying that, he shot her a look while suppressing his anger before turning to face the reporters behind him. His cold eyes swept across their faces. "If you have any questions, I can answer on her behalf." The crowd shuddered at his gaze, and everyone turned to look at one another. No one dared to say a word for some time. Given Lucian's status, if they said something wrong that day, they might lose their jobs. No one wanted to face that kind of repercussion. Lucian frowned and grabbed the wrist of the woman behind him before glancing at the crowd in front of him. "If there are no questions, I'm taking her away." Without waiting for a reaction, he held Roxanne's hand and pulled her out of the crowd. The previously clamoring crowd fell silent as the two passed by and was even compelled by Lucian's powerful aura to make way for them. Coming out of the crowd, Roxanne had not had time to breathe a sigh of relief when she looked at the person in front of her, and her anxiety only increased further. "Get in." Lucian brought her all the way to his car and said in a terrifyingly chilly voice as he opened the passenger door. Roxanne pursed her lips slightly but stood still. "I drove here, so I can just drive myself back in a bit." Although flustered, she still kept her composure. "The rumors about Jack and me haven't been clarified and will only become more outrageous if I get into Lucian's car in front of those reporters." Her rejection further enraged Lucian. Earlier that day, as soon as he came out of the conference room, he was stopped by Kaden, who stammered out the news about Roxanne and Jack to him. Lucian already had a suspicion about the two's relationship, so when he saw the photos circulating on the internet, he merely felt irony. Yet, the next moment, he saw the scene where Roxanne appeared at the entrance of the research institute and was surrounded by people. Even though rage surged up within him, he still rushed over. "Even so, this woman repeatedly rejects my kindness." Roxanne noticed the man's increasingly cold expression and softened her voice a little. "I don't want to be misunderstood anymore. Go now. Otherwise, even you will be dragged into this mess." Before he lifted his gaze to glance at the crowd not far away. Everyone was blatantly staring at them, but when they saw him looking over, they quickly withdrew their gazes and dispersed as though nothing had happened. Only then did Lucian shift his gaze to the woman before him and ask with a frown, "What makes you say that?" Roxanne looked up to meet his gaze and noticed that the sense of trust was more prevalent despite the doubt in his eyes. She knew very well what his suspicions were. While everyone else was suspicious of the reason she could participate in the project, he merely doubted her relationship with Jack. At the thought, other than the bitterness within her, Roxanne also found it a little funny that even after her many explanations, Lucian persisted in his thoughts about her relationship with Jack. "Even though he did help me, I bet he's still irritated by those photos. His and her. How to clarify?" Roxanne looked at the man before her. At the thought that he came to help her out of the situation despite being angry, she was moved and softened her expression as she briefly and concisely told him what had happened the day before. "Ms. Hightower told Jack to get in touch with me, saying that she wanted to apologize to me in person. I went for the appointment as I couldn't refuse her request. I never expected to be photographed then. The photo of us holding hands was Jack supporting me because I nearly fell down the stairs. I knew I'd be drinking during the meal, so I didn't drive. Jack drove me there instead as we were heading the same way, and he sent me back afterward. He only dropped me at the entrance and didn't even get out of the car. She knew what explanation the man wanted from her, so she picked the part he wanted to hear in the hope that it would calm him down and he would not put her in a difficult spot before the media. Lucian's eyes darkened when he heard her explanation. The suspicion in his eyes gradually faded alongside the anger within him, but he quickly discovered something was off. If Jessica went to apologize to you, why are you and Jack the only two people in the photo? Where was she? Roxanne's tone was hesitant when she replied with a slight frown. Ms. Hightower told us to eat first as she was stuck in traffic. That photo was taken while we were waiting for her. A cold glint flashed across Lucian's eyes as he nodded. Today's news is truly just a misunderstanding. You don't need to be angry about it, Mr. Farwell, so go back quickly, Roxanne urged with furrowed brows when she noticed someone filming in the corner. Lucian followed her gaze and narrowed his eyes dangerously when he saw the camera in the corner. Seeing that, the reporter holding it trembled, got up in fear, and ran away. Only then did Lucian turn around. "Can you get in the car now, Ms. Jarvis?" he asked indifferently. Roxanne did not expect him to be so insistent and felt a little helpless. There are enough people involved in this matter. I don't want it to affect people who have nothing to do with it. As her words fell, she saw the man's eyes darkening and tensed up involuntarily. Such small trouble can't affect me. Lucian grabbed her wrist and led her in the direction of the car. Nor do I want to be just an irrelevant person in your eyes. Roxanne felt her heart skip a beat when she heard that, and by the time she reacted, he had already sat her down in his car. Outside the car window, many reporters merely looked over dumbfoundedly, holding their cameras up but not daring to take any photos. As the car slowly drove away from the entrance of the research institute, those reporters and the crowd were also left far behind. The noise surrounding Roxanne also faded into silence. She could not help but stare blankly at Lucian's impassive profile, and she unknowingly calmed down. Neither of them uttered a single word throughout the car ride. Roxanne did not even ask Lucian where he was taking her, merely contemplating how she was going to clarify the rumors later with narrowed eyes. By the time she snapped back to reality, they had arrived at her house. Rest well at home these 2 days. LOL, handle the chaos online and take charge of picking up Archie and Benny, Lucian said solemnly. Roxanne, however, appeared a little hesitant when she heard his words. It's fine. I'll get a friend to pick them up. What if the reporters find the kindergarten? Lucian shot down her idea with a frown. Can your friend handle it? The thought of the reporters heckling her children caused a sinking feeling to creep into Roxanne's heart. In the end, she agreed, in that case. I'll leave them in your care, Mr. Farwell. In the evening, after kindergarten class was over, Archie and Benny stared at their father standing before them in confusion. Your mommy has something to do, so I'll be in charge of sending you to school for the next few days, Lucian explained in a deep voice. The boys exchanged glances upon hearing his words but did not give it much thought. After all, from their perspective, whichever of their parents doing that was the same. The fact that Mommy is leaving the matter of sending us to school to Daddy means their relationship is developing in a good direction. As that thought came into their minds, Archie and Benny were secretly pleased as they obediently followed Lucian into the car. Estella was also on cloud 9. If Daddy is responsible for taking Archie and Benny to school these few days, it means I get to visit Ms. Jarvis home every day. All three kids were in a good mood and chattered away in the back seat. Unlike them, Lucian was thinking of Roxanne with a solemn look. It's obvious that Jessica was behind this incident. It seems that the lesson I gave to the Hightower family last time wasn't good enough, so she still has the energy to come out and cause trouble. Lucian stopped the car once they arrived at Roxanne's house and brought the three children into the mansion. At that moment, Roxanne was preparing dinner in the kitchen while thinking about everything that had happened earlier that day. She was so distracted that she did not notice that the children had returned. "Mommy!" The kids did not think much of it, merely running excitedly to the kitchen once they had changed their shoes. Only then did Roxanne snap back to her senses and look down at the children with a smile. Benny hugged his mother's thigh innocently. "Mommy, why did Mr. Farwell pick us up? Where's Aunt Madeline?" Hearing that, Roxanne subconsciously lifted her gaze to look at the man in the living room. She did not expect the children to ask such a question, so she did not prepare an explanation. Similarly caught off guard by the question, Lucian looked at Benny with a frown. After a long while, Roxanne finally came up with a random excuse. "Aunt Madeline has to work overtime for the next 2 days and is very busy." Benny noticed his mother was acting strangely, but he figured that she was probably too shy to tell them about her relationship progress with their father, so he simply nodded understandingly. "All right then. We'll be good and listen to Mr. Farwell." Seeing that the boy did not ask any further questions, Roxanne breathed a sigh of relief and absent-mindedly patted the children's heads. Meanwhile, in the living room, Lucian noticed that the children were surrounding Roxanne, so he got up, went to the balcony, and called Jonathan. On the other side, Jonathan had belatedly learned the news about Roxanne and was preparing to contact Lucian. Hence, he immediately picked up the call and, without waiting for Lucian to speak, said, "I already learned about Dr. Jarvis' matter. I think I should be of help." Lucian smiled when he heard that. "I also contacted you for this matter." At present, the netizens were mostly questioning whether Roxanne was qualified enough to join the Damaris family's project and how she managed to join it. No one knew the answer to that question better than Alfred. If the old man willingly clarified in her defense, the discussions would naturally die down. However, the Queen family would be dragged into the farce as a consequence. "Don't worry. Dr. Jarvis' matter is your matter, and your matter is mine as well. My family will definitely help you out. After all, only we can help," Jonathan replied with conviction. Lucian hummed in response. "Indeed. This matter can only die down with old Mr. Queen's intervention. Sorry to trouble him, and I'll pay a visit to thank him next time." Waiting for her response, Jonathan smiled meaningfully when he heard his friend's words. "You can't come alone. The person my grandpa is helping is Dr. Jarvis, so you must bring her along." Lucian responded with a light chuckle, "I plan on doing that." After engaging in small talk for a while longer, the two hung up. Lucian turned around and went back into the living room. By then, Roxanne was done making dinner and was sitting at the dining table with the children, waiting for him to go over and eat together. A hint of warmth flitted across Lucian's eyes when he saw the scene before him. He walked over and upon noticing the extra plate and cutlery on the table asked knowingly, "Did you prepare this for me, Ms. Jarvis?" Roxanne nodded gently in response. "Since I'm troubling you to ferry Archie and Benny to and from school for the next few days, Mr. Farwell, you can have dinner at my place." Before Lucian could respond, Estella threw up her hands joyfully. "Thank you, Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne smiled, feeling much more relaxed than before, as she watched the young girl's delight. Since Estella had replied, Lucian arched his brows but said nothing, merely picking up his fork and eating. After dinner, the little girl was still reluctant to leave. Seeing as it was still early, Roxanne and Lucian did not persist and allowed the children to play for a while longer. After tidying up the dining room, Roxanne left the kitchen to see Lucian sitting on the couch with his brows furrowed, his slender hands rubbing circles on his temples. "It looks like he has a headache." Thinking of his recent insomnia, she hesitantly stepped forward and said softly, "Let me give you a massage. It'll also help your insomnia." Lucian withdrew his hand and turned back to look at her before stating, "If you're doing this because I helped you today, then forget it." He did not want her to be nice to him just to return the favor. His words brought a frown to Roxanne's face, and for a moment, she did not know how to reply. Now that she thought about it, she also could not figure out why she said those words just now. Yet, seeing Lucian's slightly haggard face triggered a strange feeling in her heart. Lucian frowned but kept silent, waiting for her reply. However, there were no movements behind him. Just when he was about to shoot her another question, a pair of hands rested on his temples and massaged them softly. Lucian's eyes darkened at her actions, but he still did not utter a word. With Roxanne's personality, if she only intended to return the favor, she wouldn't have given me a massage after hearing what I had just said. The fact that she's doing this now shows that she's not just being nice to me to repay the favor from the incident earlier day. Well, this is enough for me. He could not deny that the headache caused by insomnia was greatly relieved under her ministrations. Lucian even felt a little drowsy. Feeling sleepiness threatening to overwhelm him, he raised his hand and grabbed her wrist, pulling her hand down. Roxanne was taken aback by his action. As expected of the top traditional medicine doctor. "My headache is much better." Lucian got up from the couch. "It's getting late. I should take Estella back. I'll pick up Archie and Benny in the morning." At that, Roxanne nodded somewhat sluggishly and watched as Lucian walked toward the backyard. Not long after, Estella was led into the mansion by her father before bidding Roxanne farewell obediently. Roxanne smiled at the little girl and followed them out of the mansion. Only after Lucian's car had gone a distance away did she turn around and head back in. That very night, the Queen family announced that Roxanne was the one who had cured Alfred's sickness, resulting in the latter nominating her as a candidate for the Damaris family's project. The internet went abuzz right after that. In a short span of time, those who were initially against Roxanne now sided with her, although there were some who still questioned her ability. Roxanne was astounded to suddenly receive such an update before going to bed. She had once thought of asking Alfred to help clear the air, but she also didn't want to involve him in the whole ordeal. Yet, the Queen family had decided to help her voluntarily. Thanks to that, the situation was now far more controlled compared to during the day, even if some remained doubtful of her. Not wanting to disrupt Alfred's quiet time, Roxanne decided to dial Jonathan's number. The latter had just finished taking care of his family's PR errands when he answered Roxanne's call. "I just saw the announcement made by your family. Thank you for speaking up for me, Mr. Queen," the woman said with gratitude. Jonathan let out a profound chuckle. "Don't just thank me. To be honest, I took a lot of risks over this matter. I wouldn't necessarily have spoken up if it were just for your sake." Roxanne froze briefly upon hearing that, and she thought back to the similar tone he had used during the medical consultation back at the orphanage. She had thanked him under the assumption that he had helped her when it was, in fact, Lucian's decision all along. Did he do something again? Did Lucian go and look for you? Roxanne surmised. Jonathan's laughter came through the phone instantly. "That's right. Well, I did consider taking action, but it was Lucian's personal phone call that really convinced me to make the announcement. So if you want to express your gratitude, I'm not the only one you should be thanking." Conflict swirled within Roxanne's heart. "So that phone call he made on the balcony while I was making dinner was to Mr. Queen? He was asking him to make an appearance and help me. He probably would have continued to keep this from me if Mr. Queen hadn't explained anything." Roxanne felt perplexed at the thought of this. "I will, Mr. Queen." "Thank you," she finally responded, concealing her mixed emotions. "I'll thank old Mr. Queen in person another time." Jonathan agreed with a smile. Right after hanging up, Roxanne opened up her chat conversation with Lucian, but even after staring at her screen for God knows how long, she couldn't figure out what to write. Ultimately, she put her phone away without sending out a single text message. Back at the Hightower residence, Stephen thought that since his daughter had apologized to Roxanne and the latter had forgiven her, Lucian would now let them off and that they were clear from danger. Yet, even after waiting all day, the situation remained the same as that of the past 2 days, with various companies calling in and asking to terminate joint projects for all sorts of reasons. Things became direr by night, where those who called couldn't even come up with any more excuses, instead telling Stephen frankly that Lucian had told them not to work with the Hightowers. Naturally, Stephen dared not say anything in response. It was only after hanging up that he realized something amiss, so he headed upstairs to knock on Jessica's door. The young woman was currently staring at her phone with a grim expression. "It's only been 1 day. I took so long planning everything, and yet the tables have already turned? To think that even the Queen family backed that woman up. What's so great about her?" An uncontrollable degree boiling with rage, Stephen banged on the door. Jessica glanced at the door with a sullen look before getting up and walking over. She saw how infuriated her father looked the moment she opened the door. "Is this your doing?" the man roared at her. Jessica froze momentarily. Although he had lost her temper with her in the past, this was her first time seeing him so livid. "It's all Roxanne's fault." In spite of her fear, the woman mustered up the courage to stare at her father. "What did I do wrong? All I wanted was to show everyone her true colors." Stephen's brows furrowed deeply at that. What did you say? Seriously, I don't know what people see in her that even the Queen family would step forward to defend her. I'll never believe she could cure old Mr. Queen. Stephen grew puzzled at her words, and deep down, he began to sense that something was off. It felt as though his daughter had committed something atrocious unbeknown to him. Feeling his stomach drop upon recalling what Farwell Group had done tonight, he strode into Jessica's bedroom and gazed at her phone screen. Then, he picked up the device to see a string of comments, all of which were about Roxanne. It all started from the 3 photos that surfaced last night. At that moment, Stephen realized that his daughter was behind the whole incident. You imbecile! With a bellow, he smashed Jessica's phone into bits. The woman jumped in fright and stared at her father. Are you insane? What are you getting all worked up for? Yet, she received a vicious slap across the face as soon as her words fell. She clutched her cheek and turned to her father in disbelief. Do you have any idea who has Roxanne's back? Stephen yelled in fury. It's because you got on her nerves back then that Farwell Group started giving us hell the very next day. Why do you think I told you to apologize to her? But look at what you've done now. Do you think Farwell Group's going to let us off this time? Jessica was rendered speechless for a moment. That can't be. I know Lucian's fiancé. Why would he ever back Roxanne up? Seeing that the circumstances had unfolded to such an extent, Stephen could only cling to the last hope he possibly had. I want you to apologize to Roxanne publicly. Do it now and post it online. We might still stand a chance if you manage to subdue these comments. Despite her reluctance, Jessica knew she had no choice but to concede when Farwell Group was against them. In a matter of minutes, she used another phone to post a public apology on Twitter, citing her jealousy over Roxanne and Jack's relationship as the reason behind her actions. Her words appeared sincere enough, but unfortunately, the post caused nothing more than a small buzz before being flooded by similar comments once again. Even if more people now believed in Roxanne, the suspicions from those who didn't still carry a considerable amount of impact on her. Both Jessica and Stephen's faces turned increasingly pale as the number of comments continued to pick up. Evidently, the situation had escalated to an uncontrollable degree. At this rate, it'll be over for the Hightower family. Jessica's eyes became filled with panic, followed by hatred. It's all because of Roxanne. As if seducing Jack wasn't enough, she even went after Lucian when he already has a fiancé. None of this would have happened to our family if it weren't for her. Who dares question you? The next morning, Roxanne woke up and immediately checked the comments online. She was now the most trending person on Twitter. Thinking that the comments were leaning to her disadvantage, Roxanne's heart sank as she glanced at the first post with a frown. To her surprise, the most viral tweet was a video of her own professor in an interview. It wasn't just him, many of Harvey's internationally renowned research partners from his overseas institutes were present too. I've long heard about the Damaris family's project, Harvey stated in the video. As Janet's professor, I'm extremely proud that my student has been chosen to take part in this project. I've also come across many comments on her medical prowess within the nation. Please give Janet your trust, for she'll be sure to surprise you. The man had a smile on his face, but his eyes looked stern. After he was done speaking, it was the other researchers' turn to give their opinion about Roxanne. Upon seeing those familiar faces, emotion swirled within Roxanne as her eyes began to water. The comment section under this post blew up, but unlike yesterday, most of the comments were of people apologize to Roxanne. Bib Mama, Janet? Is this the same Janet I know? She actually came back to the country in secret, and she's this gorgeous? She'd make it big with just her looks, but she's relying on her talents instead? That's it. I'm officially a fan of hers now. Most of the comments indicated surprise that Roxanne was actually Janet, and those who had never heard of the latter were quickly filled in by other netizens. Janet wasn't as popular in the country compared to Roxanne, but she was still fairly well known internationally, so it was more acceptable for her to be joining the Damaris family project as the former. Thanks to yesterday's news, Roxanne's good looks had added a touch of color to Janet's name. Now, Janet was referred to as the goddess of the medical world by social media. Roxanne hadn't gotten used to the sudden changes in opinions that had occurred overnight. After scrolling on her phone a while longer, she exited Twitter and looked up her professor's contacts so she could thank him. Yet, a phone call came from the latter just as she was about to dial his number. The woman picked up immediately. "Professor Lambert, why didn't you tell me about something this serious? What do you take me for?" Harvey questioned her right away. In spite of his sullen tone, Roxanne felt a sense of warmth well up within her, for she knew he was only worried about her. "I'm sorry, Professor Lambert. It all happened because of me, so, if she were to disclose her identity as Janet, it wouldn't take long for everyone to figure out that she was Harvey's student." Given the severity of yesterday's comments, the woman was afraid of ruining Harvey's reputation. She didn't want others rebuking him for having such an unethical student. The sudden turn of tides today had to be due to both the Queen family and Jessica's respective statements. "I'm not having any of your excuses. You're my student, and if anyone dares question you, that means they're questioning me too," Harvey declared. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.